there is a mindset out there for whatever reason, and with some people, that your garden is meant to have a plant in a sea of mulch. It's time we have a talk about mulch. Hi everyone, I'm Erin, the Impatient Gardener. I live and garden here in southeastern Wisconsin, Zone 6A. And today I want to talk to you about mulch because I think somewhere along the line, we all started thinking about mulch in the wrong way. So what is mulch? Well, at its core, mulch is basically anything that covers the surface of the soil. For the purposes of this video, I'm not going to be talking about inorganic mulches like stone or rubber. I have no experience with those personally, and I recognize that there are some places in the country where particularly stone mulch is a very important thing because there's fire danger and you need to have that. And except in those particular circumstances, I don't generally think of those as the kind of mulches that we're talking about here, because I'm generally speaking of organic mulches that are going to break down in the soil. So mulch is really important for a number of reasons. First of all, it prevents soil erosion. And when I say erosion, I mean even wind-blown erosion, because soil will just blow away. And that is how a lot of soil is actually lost. It also, of course, prevents weeds from growing. It keeps moisture in the soil. And I will tell you right now, there is an aesthetic component to mulch. And this is the part where I want to put in a disclaimer, because I am going to say some things about mulch here that are not going to jibe with what some people like in their garden. And what I'm going to say is that you should do whatever you want in your own garden. If you love the look of wood chip mulch, you should have that in your garden, and you don't need to justify or explain that decision to anyone, including me. However, what I'm trying to get at here is that I think at some point we were led to believe that that is what gardens should look like. Somewhere along the line, and I don't know if there's a big mulch lobby out there or what, but I think at some point we got the idea that gardens were supposed to be plants dotted in amongst mulch. And really the way we should be thinking about mulch is mulch as a tool to help establish plants in our garden. So as Roy Diblick often says, there is not a single plant on the face of the earth that has adapted to grow in a bed of wood chips. And yet many of us pile wood on top of our garden year after year after year, not necessarily because there's any reason to do it, but because we think that's what we're supposed to be doing. And that can really have some detrimental effects. So let's talk a little bit about what is a good mulch. To me, the very best mulch is plants. I strive to have a garden that is nothing but plants. I would love, once plants are up and growing, to not see any space between them. And really, I think that's how plants want to live. They want to live in communities amongst each other. So I rely heavily on ground covers or plants that provide a lot of shade along the soil, because plants will do all the things that mulch will do. They will prevent erosion, they will prevent weeds, they will keep the soil moist just by being there. And of course, there are other organic mulches. So arborist chips are one you might hear about all the time. And arborist chips are the things that people who take down trees throw through the chipper. Usually this is branches with leaves and evergreen needles and all the things on all mixed up. And what this creates when that goes through that chipper is a mulch that is different sizes, which is really important for a mulch because it provides spaces for air to get through, because it doesn't all lock together because it's all the same size. So you've probably heard of this, but arborist chips are really, really good for establishing a new bed. I love them for putting around newly planted trees and shrubs. I think they are a great mulch for that because, again, different sized chips, they keep the moisture in the soil, keep the weeds away, but airflow still continues there. They are, however, perhaps not the most attractive mulch you could use. So you could think about something like triple shredded hardwood. This is a mulch that you're probably going to buy in bulk from a garden center. You rarely find this in bags, at least that I've seen. One kind of mulch that I particularly love is something that is often called pine fines or pine bark fines. And you can sometimes buy these in multiple sizes, but I love them when they're very small. And this is actually the same material that makes up a large component of many of our container soils because it provides really good drainage. It breaks down really nicely. I think it looks really, really nice in a garden, but it is definitely going to break down in a season. And of course, there are mulches that sort of naturally happen in our garden. Leaves are one of them. Leaves from deciduous trees that fall in autumn, with the possible exception of oak, just because oak takes a long time to break down. This is a really good mulch. You just leave those on your beds. Again, this is not the most attractive option, but leaves will break down really nicely and really help to lighten the soil. Really good for clay soils. You can also do the chop and drop method, which is where you let your plants stand for winter, and in spring you just come through and you just chop the foliage that's standing there. In the places where I do this, I often take a strimmer and I just chop everything into pieces so it breaks down into, so it's actually in smaller pieces in the bed. This is really a good way to handle many perennials. And actually what it does is it actually returns some of those nutrients to the soil that were taken out of the soil during the growing process. Now, in the past few years, I've changed up what I do for mulch quite a bit. And that is due to two factors. The first is that I do have invasive jumping worms in this garden. I've had them here since I think 2016 or so. And in some places, it's becoming really quite a problem. Jumping worms is a whole issue unto itself, but basically where the science is leading us on jumping worms is that there's no getting rid of them, there's just managing them. And one of the things they found is that jumping worms love leaves. They just churn through them like crazy. And they also love wood mulch. And so by using either of those as a mulch, you're actually helping the jumping worm population if this is something that you have in your garden like I have in mine. So last year I stopped using any of those things with the exception of arborist chips around newly planted trees and shrubs, which I really feel is the best for those. And what the research has shown as far as jumping worms go is that probably the two best things that you can use as a mulch are the chop and drop method, so just plant material that you've chopped down, or what I'm using, which is pine straw. So if you live in the South, pine straw will be no surprise to you because pine straw has been used particularly in the South, but also in kind of forested areas as a mulch for ages. In my part of the world, it's not particularly readily available, or it hasn't been until now. Last year, I found this company, Mid-Atlantic Pine Straw, that will actually ship bales of pine straw. I started using it last summer. I loved it, so I'm using it pretty much exclusively this summer. And what I've discovered about it is that not only do I love it because of the jumping worm thing, I also like the aesthetics of it, and maybe this is the novelty of a northern gardener having pine straw in their garden. I would imagine a southern gardener might say, well, that just looks like mulch because they're used to it. Anyway, what I really love about it is that I didn't mulch my garden for a lot of years, properly at least, because I hate moving mulch around. I get so sick of wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow after wheelbarrow and spreading it. I mean, it is a really laborious process. And what I love about the pine straw is I just grab a bale, I carry it by hand, and then I just kind of pull it apart, fluff it up, and add it to the soil. And one thing we should just quickly get out of the way here is that most mulches, if they are just laid on top of the soil and not worked in, really have very little effect on your soil in terms of acidity as they are breaking down, or even nutrients. So I'm pretty much a pine straw convert. It remains to be seen whether this changes my jumping worm situation or not, but purely from the ease of use standpoint, I'm really loving it. Now you notice there's one kind of mulch I haven't talked about here, and that is the mulch that you go to any big box store or garden center that comes in a bag that says mulch, because these products are really not frankly great for your garden. These products can be made from a lot of things, including often like chipped up pallets and chipped up wood. And they're always, if you notice, they're pretty much always a consistent size. And so this is where we get to the point that I was making with the arborist chips. Because if you have a mulch that is a really consistent size, what you can end up with is all of them sort of locking together and creating a mat. And now what you're doing is the opposite of what you wanted your mulch to do, because there's no air exchange with that, water doesn't get through, and now you're creating this almost stagnant soil. And a couple of inches of that, no big deal. But the problem comes when people apply this in multiple inches year after year after year for no reason other than that they think that's what they should be doing. And I have friends who do this. And they do this because they see a weed, so they're like, oh, we got to throw mulch on it. A way better way to deal with this is to properly weed your beds to prepare for the mulch, and then do your mulch. And then the next year, weed your beds again, but fluff up that mulch and see if you actually need more. A 2-inch layer is really all you need. I know you've seen this in different places. You can go and you can dig down 6 inches, and sometimes you get an actual crust where and then you get to the soil, and the soil is just dead and dying, and sometimes it even smells bad because it's completely anaerobic. And this all happens because there is a mindset out there, for whatever reason, and with some people, that your garden is meant to have a plant in a sea of mulch. So have you ever noticed when you go to gardens or when you see planted areas that have this, you notice how those plants almost never get any bigger? It's because they are struggling in there, because they don't have what they need. And all those nutrients you thought you were adding to that soil by allowing that mulch to break down, you're actually not. It's not getting into that soil at all, because this mulch is not getting a chance to break down and no water is getting down there. And I'll tell you where mulch, even that mulch I just talked about, really shines. And that's when you plant a garden at the proper density, and then you go in and you put a layer of mulch around those plants. Because what you're doing is all the good things that mulch does, and you're helping those plants get established. And the next year the plants are a little bigger, and you probably don't need to mulch that year because you mulched the year before. Then the next year the plants get a little bigger. Maybe you need to add a little bit of mulch in there. But eventually what you end up with is a garden full of plants, and the plants are the mulch. Now, of course, perennials don't come out the size they're going to be later on. So sometimes you need a little mulch between them so that you don't get a bunch of weeds in there while those plants are getting up to their full size for the season. So one thing I sort of challenge everyone to do is think about the gardens that they've seen pictures of that they really love. And then I want you to take that view down to soil level and tell me, what does that look like? Because in most cases, what that looks like is plants. In most cases, you're not seeing mulch in those gardens that you think are beautiful. And that's because mulch is being used to help establish plants, not to be the focal point with a plant in the middle of it. So listen, I'm not the mulch police. You do what you want in your own garden, but do it because you want to do it. Don't do it because somewhere along the line, probably somebody selling mulch in bags, made you think that that's what you were supposed to be doing. Do you love the look of it? Do it. Are you doing it because you think you're supposed to be, and somehow you're going to get the look of those great gardens that you've seen by doing that? Don't do that. And I say, when in doubt, plant more plants. Plants are the mulch. Use mulch to help you get to the point where the plants are the mulch. All right, this has been a public service message from the Impatient Gardener. Go forth and do whatever it is that you want to do with your mulch, but just think about why you're doing it first. Have a great day in your garden, everyone. See you soon.